I think she'll be remembered as a fabulous singer, and there was no question about her talent, but a rather fragile one whose career was seen to be buffeted by, sort of drug abuse, a tumultuous marriage, just erratic behaviour at times. I mean, she was, from the moment I think that I became aware of her when she first toured Australia, there was something about her that didn't appear to be comfortable in her own skin, as I recall. I remember there were people down here in record companies that had worked unbelievably hard to make her proportionally bigger in Australia than almost anywhere else in the world. And when she got here, she wouldn't actually meet them, and she wouldn't make herself available to anything. And so this doesn't come as a great surprise to me, as tragic as it is. I mean, she has died 2 years before the age that we lost Michael Jackson. 48 is a terribly early time to check out. But I suppose if you think about the last time she was in Australia, I mean, it wasn't an edifying spectacle. I mean, it was a situation of people quite literally asking for their money back at some of the shows. The voice was cracking. It was not in good form. She was plainly not in a good place. And I suppose when you make your career on having this soaring, superb, beautiful voice, and believe me, it was hugely successful. I think to this day, the Bodyguard soundtrack is still the best-selling record in places like Korea and Singapore and Hong Kong, etc., places in Asia. And that. I mean, I suppose you've built your reputation on having such a powerful, peerless voice. It does shock people when you sound a little bit vocally ravaged, as she did when she actually was out here last time. But maybe we became a bit inured to stories about problems in Whitney's life, because with Bobby Brown, it seems to me that they were not finding married life all that easy on a lot of occasions, and yet she should have had this all in her stride. I mean, think about her pedigree. I mean, she is the daughter of Whitney Houston, who was one of Elvis Presley's sweet inspirations and one of the great gospel singers. She is the niece of Dionne Warwick. So she would have grown up with all this sort of a professional lifestyle, so much a part of her life. But it has been suggested that maybe that was a bit of a curse to her, because she expected everything to come rather easy. Unlike her niece and her mother, maybe she didn't have to fight very hard for it. She didn't have to really go out and scramble. A lot of things were handed to her on sort of a plate, I suppose, and for that reason, maybe she took a lot of it for granted. But people admired her musically and professionally, but I think a lot of people had their doubts about her as a person and an individual. She could be abrasive in many, many circumstances, but the loss at that young age is absolutely appalling. And it's on the eve of other Grammys. I imagine that they'll be given over to celebrating her. And it comes not that long after we've lost Etta James. Now, Etta lived a lot longer, of course, but Etta was another fabulous singer. And to lose Etta, and she'll no doubt be celebrated tonight on the Grammys. And to lose Etta and then to lose Whitney within really weeks of each other is a pretty shattering thing.
So, Glenn, you described those scenes when she was last out here in Australia and the shock that many crowds had in terms of her really not being able to perform. Why was she still continuing on with it? Was it a matter of money?
Well, one doesn't really know when one is not privy to, I suppose, those things. I mean, no performer is ever as rich as you think they are. That's always a given. And usually, if they undertake tours, there's often a good reason why they're doing so. But also, I mean, I suppose to be a performer, to perform is to validate you, as sort of a human being. It's what you do. And so, when you're a singer, when you're an artist, you go out and you sing and you perform. And maybe you don't want to tell yourself that you're not reaching the notes, that you're not, in fact, sort of having the energy to get through the shows, that you're not emotionally involved with it like you were. You don't want to believe that, so you go out and you take the bookings and you do the shows. Look, I can remember there was a parallel to this, and it was just before we lost him as well, with Barry White. And Barry White came out and did some very shaky shows in Australia, and again, there were people literally asking for their money back. He just didn't seem to be in a good place, and he just didn't sound as he should. And whereas I don't think it was quite the case with Whitney Houston, there was a very telling photograph published in Australian newspapers. I believe it was after her Brisbane show, where she was just sitting in a hotel coffee shop or something, and she had her head in her hands, and she was just looking forlorn, and just not looking in a good place at all. And that's a terrible thing. You don't want it. No matter what you think of an artist anyway, you don't want to see someone who was at the top of their game once looking in a situation where they're anything but at the top of their game. So what is interesting, I think, is, I can only speak personally, when I just heard a moment ago that Whitney Houston had died, there wasn't a sense of shock with me for a moment, and it was okay. Yes, right. I can see why that might have happened. I mean, we've seen the case of particularly female tragic performers. We go back to Billie Holiday, and we go to Janis Joplin. Go back to Bessie Smith. If you want to, the lot and the life of divas, of female performers, has never really been a strong and secure one. Okay, we have Madonna, who's sort of strong and has invented herself a number of times, but generally it can be a hard thing being a female performer.
And how do you think she has influenced other artists coming up behind her?
The voice was a pretty good example of sort of a well-modulated, powerful, expressive soul. Look, I don't think she was all that soulful myself. I thought that there was, it was a commercial, polished voice, and I thought, I Will Always Love You. I personally prefer the Dolly Parton original, but at the same time, I don't think she was Etta James. I don't think that there wasn't sort of a tremulous sort of tone in there that got into my spine in particular. But I admired the range, the scope, the projection, the power, and like I said, to me, she was Sissy's daughter, and she was Dion's niece. I mean, hey, that's to be respected. That's to be respected. I think there'll be a lot of performers out there, the Beyoncés and that of this world, who are going to, just on the back of being quite shattered by the death of Etta, are going to be really, really knocked over by the death of Whitney.